Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 28-year personal injury lawyer. And this is the podcast where we discuss everything personal injury law related. And recently I joined Soren, who is a local sports talk radio personality here in Kansas City, on his podcast, Red, Gold, and Bold, which centers around everything related to the Kansas City Chiefs. And on this episode, it was all about the Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver, Rashee Rice, and the legal troubles that he is facing from an auto accident that it appears he caused in conjunction with another person when he was racing a Lamborghini that he had rented down in Texas, and he was racing this other guy who had a Corvette. They obviously lost control. They were driving, I think, around 120 miles per hour is what it's been stated, and caused a serious accident leading to some serious injuries. And it's interesting because this particular situation has two components to it. He's facing criminal charges and he's facing civil lawsuits. And so that you understand, there are two aspects to the law. There is the criminal side. We obviously always hear a lot about the criminal side. Most of our TV shows deal with the criminal side of the law. So everybody's very familiar with that. And then there's the civil side of the law, that's where I work. That's my area of the law. And this particular situation, again, it involves both because he's got criminal charges and he's got lawsuits for personal injury that he's facing. And so our discussion on this podcast that I joined just sort of revolved around both of those areas and a little bit of the interplay, because it is interesting that his criminal charges may end up with a conclusion based on how the personal injury claims end up resolving. Because if he's going to not face the full extent of the punishment on the criminal side, it's probably going to largely depend on how his victims, the people he hurt, are compensated on the civil side. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this discussion that I had with Soren and his fellow host on the podcast. And again, the whole situation is a really interesting one to bring into focus how both areas of the law can intersect sometimes. So without further ado, here is my discussion with Soren on his podcast, Red, Gold, and Bold.
Now, here are the hosts of the Best Chiefs podcast, Jeff Chadilla, Sam McDowell, and Soren Petro.
Thank you very much, Curtis. Do appreciate it. And thank you for joining us here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. We're proudly brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. You can find them online at gannasphalt.com. We're tackling all things Rashee Rice here. Listen, we finally heard Rashee Rice speak. Not much, didn't have much to say, but, we're going to get into that a little bit more, whether he helped or hurt his cause with what he said. And we're going to get to the bottom of the legal side of things and find out what, at least an attorney at law thinks we should be expecting.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to talk about this. To devote an entire podcast to Rashee Rice may seem extreme, but it's gotten to that point. And there's so many different elements of this now. And I know that sometimes people think it's like a Law and Order type episode or a Suits where things get resolved really fast. This is going to take some time. It's going to be really complicated. But to have a lawyer come on, a lawyer who actually pays us, on top of that is a nice perk to the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to get expert legal advice on our dime, on his dime. You listen, and this is important, Sam, also because you were out of practice today. You said, listen, he's the star of the show. Rashee Rice looks like definitively the best receiver. So any thoughts that, he's not going to be a big part of what they're doing, we can dismiss that right away.
Yeah, I mean, he was today, and Jeff was out there as well. And to echo what Jeff said, I mean, this is not a fast-moving process because it's typically not a fast-moving process. But those of us covering the team, fans of the team, are left still with more questions about what's next as opposed to answers about what's next. And it does happen just to be, as you just said, a very critical piece of the Chiefs' offense this year.
Yeah, they're going to need him. They're practicing, and one of the things we talked about today on the radio show, Sam, was that they're definitely using him, right? Like it's not like they're shying away from whether, we're not going to go get him. We're not going to run the offense like we're going to run it later in the year. They're running it. The way they're going to run it ultimately, we're going to find out when we're going to find him back on the football field and when we can expect him to, be contributing the way that they're talking about it. Let's bring in our legal expert, Eric Bartlett, joins us now from Northland Injury Law. Eric, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and certainly appreciate the support with the podcast, and it's great having you as a sponsor. By the way, Northland Injury Law is Kansas City's Google 5-star rated personal injury lawyers, helping people with serious injuries, car accidents, work accidents, falls, other serious personal injuries. Their attorneys have been serving the Kansas City area for more than 40 years. They don't get paid unless they get money for their clients. That's right. They don't get paid unless you get paid. Northland Injury Law voted #1 accident lawyer in Kansas City. Don't wait. Get compensated now. If you have a case, text HURT, H-U-R-T, to 22222. Again, if you have a case, text HURT to 22222. You can talk to Eric in the process, 816-400-HURT. You can call 816-400-4878 right now. The choice of a lawyer is an important one and should not be based solely upon advertisements. Again, text HURT. It's just that simple. HURT to 22222 to get connected 24/7. And Eric, thank you again for the time, as we said. And listen, would you be wanting to represent some of the people that were involved in this accident? Does this look like one that's a pretty open and shut case when you have a giant video like we've got here?
There will be settlements. I'm pretty certain of that. I don't think at this point there's any question he was involved or the other driver was involved. And it sounds like there are some serious injuries. To what extent is a question mark at the moment. And we can get into that a little bit more here as we discuss this. But yes, it would definitely meet the criteria for Northland Injury Law to represent those clients.
Well, Eric, I want to jump into the criminal side of this first because I'm always curious with obviously with the civil case, how much the criminal aspect of it impacts the civil side of it. And first of all, it's just what kind of timeline is reasonable to expect from something like this, even though there's video and he's claimed some kind of culpability already?
Sure. So, and as any good lawyer would do, my disclaimer will be that #1, I'm not a Texas lawyer. And #2, I'm not a criminal defense lawyer. However, I've been a lawyer for about 30 years. I know the system. And in preparation for coming on here, I did reach out to a couple of my buddies who are longtime criminal defense lawyers to just get an idea of, if that was here, say in Missouri, what's that look like? And so, with all of that being said, Texas, so Texas, as generally speaking, is considered more stringent, tougher on crime. But even every state, it comes down to county by county. And so we look at Dallas County, which is where all of this is going down. And Dallas County is known to be stricter on the law enforcement side but then has been criticized on the prosecution side of things as being too lenient. And just there's been, I think, issues with offenders getting released on bail, going out, committing more serious crimes. And, I think generally speaking, again, generally larger areas, your metropolitan areas, those judicial systems are usually overworked and overloaded. And that's a lot of times where you find a situation where things might go by a little easier. Now, this particular situation is obviously high profile. So I don't think that's going to be the case. But if we get into timeline, and again, everything we talk about and all the other talking head lawyers that discuss this, we're taking guesses. But generally speaking, I can answer the question that this is going to probably take months, if not over a year, to get resolved. And the reason for that is generally the more serious the crime, the more involved the whole process is. Generally speaking, a defendant is going to want a jury trial for these types of charges. And, as I'm sure you all know and have discussed, Mr. Rice is facing, at the worst, his worst charge is a first-degree felony in the state of Texas. And it's aggravated assault, which is a second-degree felony. But one of the enhancers is if it's involving a motor vehicle. And so that raises it to a first-degree felony. And a first-degree felony in Texas is a 5 to 99-year sentence or life. So a really big deal. And then he has a third-degree felony that he's facing. And then I think he has like 6, I think essentially misdemeanor charges. So on its face, he's got some big stuff hanging over his head. And so with that, when you're a defense lawyer representing him in that capacity, you're looking at, there's a discovery process. Obviously, there's an exchange of information between prosecutor and defense. And from the most simplest of things, right? Police reports, videos. Then you've got people that were injured here. So there's going to be an issue of medical documentation, because at the end of it, the defense is obviously going to want to know, and the prosecutor as well, but what's the extent of these people's injuries? And that's never an easy process, getting medical documentation. A lot of times that requires subpoenas and things like that. So that can be a bog down. And then there's going to be probably pretrial motions, and all of that just goes into it. Then let's just say the defense lawyer gets to the point where that person's ready to ask the court for a jury trial setting. In Missouri, I can tell you, if you go up to one of the counties, if you want a first setting, that means whatever that date is, you're the number one setting, you have the priority. Like right now, if we went down to Jackson County, we're talking summer of 2025. And so if you want to take something less than that and risk, getting bumped, if you want a third or fourth setting, sure, you could get something in the fall. But then you stand a high risk of getting bumped and then starting over. So realistically, this is going to take a while, and I have a feeling nothing will come of anything during the season. And that's sort of a very broad overview. And by the way, I have a good example I thought of today. We all remember Britt Reed.
Yeah.
And, the accident he was involved in occurred in February of 2021. He was sentenced in November of 2022. So well over, obviously over a year and a half. So no, these serious felony type charges can really drag on.
Eric, an important point there, because I think a lot of people watch this video, number one, and heard his attorney, Royce West, say that Rashee Rice acknowledged to police that he was driving the Lamborghini SUV, and probably view it as a little bit of cut and dry of why hasn't this process accelerated. And so the steps to get there, I think, are important to note. But recognizing that your expertise isn't civil, I did want to ask you one more question about the criminal charges, which is because of, it seems like the most obvious point in this would be who is driving the car. Rashee Rice has admitted that to police, according to his attorney. Do you think this is more likely because of that to wind up in a plea deal, and therefore that could shorten the time frame? And if there is a plea deal, can you envision one, given the nature of the charges that you just explained? 8 charges, one of them is a felony, 2 of them are felonies. Can you envision him avoiding jail time?
Well, so when it comes time to discuss a possible plea agreement, they're going to look at the overall nature and extent of the entire situation. And so the fact that he did obviously, subsequently admit, I was the driver, I was involved in this, that's going to be a step in the right direction for him. They're going to look at him, his criminal history, which to my knowledge, he has none. Again, I haven't heard anything where he has any significant criminal past or anything like that. And if I'm mistaken, feel free to let me know, but that's my understanding. He's a 24-year-old. I'm sure a good defense lawyer is going to argue things about, the mental maturity of males and, the circumstances that this young man finds himself in, which is, I've got some money now and, didn't think it through and thought this would be fun. And unfortunately, like I think was his comment, it's an accident. And I'm sure it's going to come down the road to some type of an apology coming forth. They're going to obviously consider at the end of this the seriousness and the permanency of injuries to the people that were involved. And, if people do make a good recovery, again, we don't know the details of the injuries. I've heard concussion. I've heard broken bones. These are serious things. But again, we don't know what that looks like long term. The other thing that will probably play into all of it is insurance, because it's a big fact. It's a big factor. If there's insurance on the vehicle that covered Rice for these injuries and the damages, the medical bills, lost wages, if there are any, the harms, the losses, just all of it. If there's insurance or other money to provide a recovery to these people and get them compensated, that's going to go into it as well. And so at some point, you have to assume there's going to be plea negotiations. And, again, using Britt Reed just as an example, even though it was a judge ordered situation, but, his maximum possibility he was facing was 7 years. He got a 3-year sentence. And, very similar in circumstances as far as a very seriously injured person. But he had a background. And so, that would obviously play into it as well. And here, like I say, we kind of have on our face, the face of it, a young guy, no real history. It looks a lot like an accident, a stupid accident. That's the other thing I was going to point out. There's a difference between reckless and intentional, stupid and heinous. And, this looks a lot like really, really bad stupidity.
Yeah.
And so all of that's going to play in at some point in negotiations. And because the prosecutor has to decide, what is the likelihood if I get in front of a jury that I'm going to be able to make these things stick? And so I would be shocked if somewhere down the road something didn't happen.
And then the other question I wanted to ask you, Eric, was specifically about the civil cases. There's one trial date that's set for December. Will Rashee Rice be required to appear in a trial if there is a civil case that's ongoing? And also, just how does his public figure nature of this affect these civil suits?
Yeah, so in theory, again, I can't really talk about Texas and what their requirements are. A defendant doesn't have to show up for a civil trial. It's not a good look. I would be probably happy. Well, unless I just had a really jerk of a defendant on the other side, and I was really anxious to get that person on the stand because I figure the jury's just going to hate them. The other side of that is they don't show up. It looks like they don't care. And they have some lawyer that's defending it for them, and that's not a good look. So whether he's required or not, that's another question. But boy, I would think he would want to be there. Now, having said all that, it's a civil matter. And again, I'm sure arguments can be made. We need to continue this case until such and such date when the defendant is available, because, in December,
right,
he's going to be in the middle of big stuff.
That was my question. Where are judges on that, on a continuation? Do they tend to say, okay, you have a job, whether it's football player, actor, or just, I don't know, what a wicked tuna fisherman that's going to be gone for 6 weeks. Like, do they expect you, this takes priority, you get here, you figure out your job on your own? Or do they tend to try to work with you based upon what is best for your job? Knowing somebody's coming for money in a civil suit. So the more money you've made, the more likely you are to be able to handle any kind of payoff. Where would the judge be as far as in your mind? And I know every judge is different, but do they tend to want to work with the individual and what do you think a continuance would be something that he would get?
My answer would be yes. He'll probably get it continued. As a lawyer that represents injured people, we're always the ones that are trying to push it forward, because obviously insurance companies and defendants are holding on to the money, and they don't mind having things drag out. Meanwhile, we're on the side of let's get this going, let's get this wrapped up. And I lose continuance motions all the time because, again, if you have legitimate reasons, it is a civil trial, and judges are generally going to at least give a party one. Now the problem is if you get into where you're trying for 2 or 3, you're going to have a problem. But I think if he tries to get it continued, it'll happen.
Eric, you mentioned the insurance aspect of this, but I think a lot of people are kind of interested in how this could affect Rashee Rice's pocketbook. And so does the insurance supersede all that, or is he on the hook for some level of money here? Like, you do this all the time. What kind of, ballpark estimate do you think, a percentage you could give of what he'd have to pay if he had some damages here? Okay, so it's a little bit of a multi-layered analysis. So today I got on.
It's complicated with the legal process.
Yeah. Got to have lawyers. Everybody hates lawyers until they need one, So, okay. So I looked today at a Lamborghini rental place in Dallas. I have no idea if it's the one where he rented his, but I wanted to try to figure out when you rent a Lamborghini, right? I'm in my mind going, they have to require that you have some insurance for all kinds of obvious reasons. And so I came across a place, they had all their agreement right online. And that particular place said you have to have $300,000 of bodily injury insurance for an accident. Okay. So we know that if that's probably standard amongst these high-end car rental places, we know there's maybe that out there. Now, the problem is we have 2 lawsuits that are filed. I believe both of the people that were injured have put in the legal pleadings. So you file a document, right, to create a lawsuit in the court system. And in Texas, it looks like you basically have to put in there in your initial legal pleading some level of money that you're claiming. And so, for example, you have to put in there that it's either $250,000 or less, $250,000 to $1 million, or more than $1 million. Well, both of these people put $1 million, and one of them is also seeking like $10 million in punitive damages. So again, now that's a pleading, that's something that was filed. It doesn't necessarily represent true facts at this moment. I shouldn't say true facts, but it's a requirement of the court. And so whether or not it's going to bear out to that extent, that's another story altogether. However, if these truly are serious life-altering injuries, then $300,000 is not going to get it done. Yeah. And so the question becomes, what happens at that point? Well, a person that's making the claim has the option. They could either, if the insurance company comes up and says, here's our $300,000, you have to sign a release of Rashee Rice, and the rental place, whoever, right? You got to release everything. You can have the $300,000. If they want to go with that and be done with it, fine. If they don't, and they want to keep pushing this, then they would be trying to go after Rashee Rice's personal wealth, personal assets, income, whatever that looks like. The problem with that is you run the risk, sure, I think he's making like $1.5 million a year, 1.6, whatever, which all sounds good and fine. But what if you get some multi-million-dollar judgment against him? Well, he'll go file for bankruptcy, and you'll have a piece of paper that says he owes you a bunch of money and it's worthless.
Right. Yeah.
So,
so you want to get what you can get, but not end up great. You got the judgment, but you get nothing for it.
Yes. And again, we don't know, right? Maybe he's already had a good advisor and somebody that said, hey man, you're out there, you got stuff now. You need to have at least $1 million of coverage, liability, and maybe $1 million umbrella or whatever. I mean, maybe there's plenty of insurance coverage out there and it never becomes an issue. But if it's not, then he could be facing some serious financial issues because of what I just said. He could be getting pushed towards some kind of a judgment that could lead him into a bad situation. The other thing is, whether you look at it from his side or the injured people's side, what if this messes up his football career? And all of a sudden, he doesn't have this kind of money coming in. Now you've also got a problem trying to collect from him, and he's got a problem because he doesn't have any money. So
the victims who are looking to get paid need him to be productive on the football field. So they have a vested interest in him playing football. To go back to one of our previous questions, it's good for the lawsuit for him to be playing productive football and earning a living so that they can get as much of it as they're seeking, or as the court system would say they warrant getting out of the lawsuit.
Yeah. Assuming insurance is not sufficient. I mean, all this assumes insurance, our number one goal as a personal injury lawyer is we hope, you need three things for a case to be viable and worth pushing down the road. And that is a serious injury, somebody else is at fault, and money. And insurance is the number one source of that. And I mean, right now, we definitely have two of the three of those components. We probably have some amount of insurance more than, most states. I don't know what Texas is. Missouri, a driver only has to have $25,000 of coverage to be legally on the road. And, that's not going to go anywhere very quickly at all. But like I said, I looked up the rental agreement. This particular company, not necessarily the one he used.
Right.
They had six figures required.
Yeah, 300,000. All right. So that pretty much lays it out. Eric, hey, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks for giving us the insights. And now we sit back and watch. I think a lot of folks thought, hey, maybe we'll get this all cleared up before training camp. Now, it looks like
it's good. Yeah. You may have me back at some point.
We'll have an update. Eric joins us part 2. We'll be looking forward to that. Hey, Eric, thanks so much. We appreciate the time. And we do. We look forward to talking to you again on down the road.
You bet, guys. Take care. Have a great night.
All right, Eric Bartlett there joining us from Northland Injury Law. And, of course, if you have a case right now, you can text HURT to 22222 or call 816-400-HURT. And you can speak to Eric, speak to his great staff right there. They'll be happy to take care of you. Google 5-star rated, Kansas City's Google 5-star rated personal injury lawyers, helping people with serious injuries. More than 40 years experience serving Kansas City. They don't get paid unless they get money for their clients. Voted number 1 accident lawyer in Kansas City. It's Northland Injury Law. You can check them out right now. Either call, like I said, 24/7, 816-400-HURT, HURT, or text HURT, HURT, to 22222. The choice of a lawyer is an important one and should not be based solely upon advertisements.